So we are going to listen to, sorry for the pronunciation, Estela Nadal Romero, and she's from the Institute of Pyrenean Institute of Ecology from the Superior Council of Research, Scientific Research from Zaragoza. And she will present us she will talk about what is the fate of Mediterranean badlands under a context of global change. So, Estela, that's for you. And so I will remind you if you are a bit too long. Okay? Well, go ahead.
We cannot hear you. Estela, your microphone is mute.
Now it's okay?
Yes, perfect.
Sorry. And the presentation is okay too? Can you see my presentation? Yes.
Yes, we can see it.
So thank you very much for this really interesting day or workshop in Women in Geomorphology, and for inviting me to be part of this. And today I would like to present one of our last study, which deals with the question, what is the fate of Mediterranean badlands under a context of global change, that we have done together with the University of Almería. This is not a case study presentation, so it's a global study, and I will try to present you our main results and the methods and the main conclusions in 15-20 minutes. So why badlands? As probably you know, badlands is a worldwide phenomenon, and in these areas that present a really complex geomorphological dynamics, we can find some of the highest soil erosion rates, of course, with many consequences in rivers and dams. In the lower part of the slide, you can see annual soil erosion rates recorded from experimental plots and experimental catchments in different land uses and different land covers. And as you can see in this red circle, badlands areas present the highest soil erosion rates comparing with different land uses and land covers. And why in the Mediterranean? For two main reasons. First of all, because most of the studies published related with badlands are located in the Mediterranean basin. And the second one is because the Mediterranean area, the Mediterranean basin, is really sensitive to the change produced by the climatic variations and also by global change. And is going to be, these effects are going to be more marked during the next decades. So we have focused on the Mediterranean and on badlands geomorphological dynamics. And also it's really important to understand the study to know that badlands can develop in different climatic environments. They can develop in arid badlands and also in humid and subhumid areas. And both environments present important differences related with vegetation and geomorphological dynamic. We have considered that arid and semi-arid areas are dry badlands with a real problem of water availability. These areas, as you can see in the photo, present really low vegetation cover. They are mainly developed in south-facing slopes, and they present moderate watering and erosion dynamics. On contrary, humid and subhumid badlands, considered in this study wet badlands, are areas located with an annual precipitation higher than 700 millimeters. So water is not a problem. They have water disposability. However, also they present low vegetation cover, and they are mainly developed in north-facing slopes. They present really high erosion rates and really high watering dynamics and erosion dynamics, and we will see what happened in both environments. So if we want to answer the question, what is the fate of Mediterranean badlands under this context, we are mainly focused in this study in two main objectives. The first one is identify the main climate drivers that are affecting the hydrogeomorphological dynamics in different badland areas, developed from arid to humid areas. And once the drivers have been identified, what we want to do is to analyze how these drivers change in the future and how will be the response of these badland areas due to global change. So to do that, what we have done? We have this is a literature review, a state-of-art article or study, and we have based our analysis in a literature review based on a typical methodologic framework, in this case, search, appraisal, synthesis, and analysis. And we have identified 44 badland studies in the Mediterranean where we can obtain information that we need to carry out our analysis. When we have identified these studies, we have identified the main climate drivers affecting the hydrogeomorphological dynamics in badland areas. Also, once identified, we have estimated the relative importance of the different drivers using different statistical methods, like the non-metric multidimensional scaling method. And finally, we have checked and analyzed what is going to happen with these drivers due to the projected climate change scenarios based on the climate model intercomparison project. So from now, I'm going to present some of the results because I don't have time to present all of them. But I think that I'm going to present some of the most interesting results. This plot represents the results of the non-metric multidimensional scaling method. And in this plot, you can see in small circles, blue and red, the wet and dry badlands. And then the arrows also represent precipitation range and temperature range. So what we can, and also are represented some of the different drivers that we have analyzed. So the first thing is that badlands appear aligned through these arrows. In the upper part with higher precipitation are located most of the wet badland sites, and in the lower part linked to these higher temperatures are the dry semi-arid badlands. Also, we can see how these badlands are grouped all together in different clusters, and also the climate drivers are clustered in different areas. So we can see how most of the wet badland areas are linked, are in the top of the graphic in this area, and are related with freeze-thaw cycles, with rainfall amount and the presence of snow, while dry badlands are more linked to rainfall intensity, time and seasonality, or wetting drying cycles. To corroborate these results, we have carried out a deeper analysis to represent which is the relative importance or relevance of the different 7 climatic drivers that we have identified from the literature review. Also, these drivers are linked with 3 geomorphological processes or dynamics, like watering processes, hydrological response, and erosion dynamics. And we have done for dry badlands and wet badlands. So what we can see is that in dry badlands, rainfall, magnitude, intensity, and seasonality is one of the main climatic drivers for the geomorphological dynamic of these arid badlands. It's really especially relevant the wetting drying cycles related with watering processes, and also you can see how rainfall and rainfall amount and rainfall intensity determine the hydrological and erosion response. Contrary, in wet badlands, we can see how, related with watering processes, freeze-thawing cycles are the main climatic driver, and for hydrological response is rainfall amount, and for erosion rates or erosion dynamic is rainfall amount and rainfall intensity. Both are really important. So once we have identified the 7 climatic factors or drivers that are more important for geomorphological dynamics and different processes, we have to know what is going to happen, what is predicted that is going to happen for these variables. So as I told you in the methodology slide, we have used the climate model intercomparison project, and we have analyzed what is going to happen in 4 scenarios, 4 different scenarios for different variables. And in these plots, in these maps that I'm going to show you are represented the results for one moderate scenario, the RCP 4.5. But here you can also see all the different scenarios from the more moderate to the extreme scenario. So also you can see in the maps where are located the dry and wet wetlands. So what is going to happen about rainfall precipitation, about rainfall patterns? As you can see in the map, it is predicted an overall decrease in annual rainfall in most of the Mediterranean basin, except in some areas that maybe you cannot see really well in this green, clear green color, that some areas in the Alps that is not really a clear pattern. It's also really relevant that is going to be is predicted a decrease of total rainfall in dry badlands that can range between 2 and 10%, as you can see in the graph, in the plot. What about rainfall intensity? That is a really important factor for badlands geomorphology. In that case, we have used the index, that is the Saint-Paul Daily Intensity Index. And as you can see, in an overall increase of rainfall intensity is observed in most of the Mediterranean basin that can range between 2–4%. And what about rainfall events? For that, we have used a number of rainfall events or rainfall days with precipitation higher than 1 millimeter. And what we have observed or predicted is a decrease in the number of rainfall events in all the Mediterranean that can be even from 5 to 15% in semi-arid or dry badlands areas. We have seen also that the effect of frost or freeze is really important in wet wetlands, and we have a model the number of frost days also in the Mediterranean, and it is predicted a clear decrease in the number of frost days that can be even 50% in some scenarios, and it's really important in mountain areas related with the Alps or the Pyrenees. So that is going to be a really relevant point for our discussion. And also, it's really important the water content of the soil layer linked to freeze-thawing cycles, but also with wetting drying processes. And what we have predicted, or the models predict, is a substantial decrease in soil moisture content, especially high in wet badland areas. So, to summary what we have observed in the predicted climatic variables, we can see that it is predicted a decrease in the number of frost days and the number of rainfall events, as well as in soil moisture content. Also, it's really relevant, as the literature show, that it's is already known that we are living in a temperature increase moment. And also it's really important the decrease in the ratio of snow to rain. So that will produce a reduction in the watering processes, sediment availability, and subsequent erosion rates. However, as I told you before, badlands geomorphology is really complex, and we can observe interaction between the different processes and some complex results, because we have also the models also predict a decrease in rainfall amount, but an increase in rainfall intensity and extreme events that can produce a lower runoff coefficient but greater erosion rates. So we have to see how these changes will affect the badlands, and especially if we take into account dry and wet badlands. So what we have modeled is that in dry badlands, there will be a reduction of wet and drying cycles, an increase of high rainfall events, as well as rainfall intensity and the occurrence of extreme events. And these changes will produce higher soil erosion rates, will decrease the plant vegetation cover, and in that case, there will be an extent of areas where runoff can be generated, and that will affect negatively to the development of biological crust that in these areas are really relevant. And all these effects will increase soil erosion rates in dry badlands. What will happen in humid, in subhumid badlands, in wet badlands? In this case, there will be a really important reduction of freeze-thaw cycles, with an increase in extreme events and rainfall intensity, and that will produce a reduction, a really important reduction of watering processes that will decrease the sediment supply from the slopes to the channels. But probably we will observe an increase in fluvial erosion, as you can see in the photo below the slide. And also an increase of rapid and intense runoff. That in wet badlands can produce or will produce a natural revegetation of the slopes. And the next question that we want to analyze in future studies is that this natural stabilization of the slopes in badlands will be possible in these extreme geomorphological environments. So to conclude, I would like only to repeat and summarize some of our main results. The hydrological response in badland areas are really strongly affected by climate variables, but it is a really complex processes with many interactions between different processes. Future scenarios for climate drivers in the Mediterranean region include, in a general patterns, declining in rainfall volumes and decrease in the number of frost days and rainfall events, and in soil moisture content, as well as an increase in rainfall intensity. That will produce different changes in dry and wet badlands that I'm going to explain in these slides, in these final slides. In dry badlands, we have identified wet and drying cycles are the main climatic drivers for watering, and rainfalls for runoff and erosion. So the predicted changes that will increase rainfall intensity and the frequency of extreme events will lead to an increase in soil erosion in these areas. That will present negative impacts on vegetation and biocrust cover that is really relevant in these areas, as you can see in the photo, and that will be enhanced integral erosion and overland flow connectivity in these areas that can emphasize offsite effects. Finally, in wet badlands, we have identified that freeze-thaw cycles are the main drivers for watering and rainfall amount and rainfall intensity for erosion and water dynamics. And the predicted changes suggest that watering processes will decline due to the decrease in the number of frost and soil moisture content, And the increase in rainfall intensity and frequency of extreme events will lead to an increase in soil erosion that probably will be more linked to fluvial erosion, and we will see all these bare badlands slopes can be revegetation as some of the ones that you can see in the photo. So all these results have been tested in 2 experimental catchments, one in Almeria in dry badlands, and also in the Pyrenees, in Central Pyrenees in Spain. And if you are more interested to know more about that results in this experimental catchment, you can check the manuscript that has been finally affected in air surface processes. That is, I think, is not still online. And well, thank you very much for your attention and for the organization of this really interesting talk and seminar. Thank you.
Monique, your microphone is switched off.
Okay, that's
perfect.
fine. I'm fine. So, well, thank you very much, Stella, for your very nice presentation, very interesting. I would like to know whether there are some questions about that.
I have.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Ask your
Hi,
question.
Estela. Hi, Estela. It's very good to see you.
Hi, Leah.
And thank you for your very, very, very nice presentation. I just wonder if you took into account changes in vegetation structure and composition when you talked about climate change and possibilities of wetter climate, for example, because it might have a very high impact on badland erosion.
I don't understand the first part of the question. If we have taken into account
vegetation changes,
no,
vegetation composition and structure.
No, not yet. We were focused only in the literature review for weathering water and erosion dynamics. And we know that vegetation is going to change, and our first idea was also to review what is the effects of climate on vegetation. But in the literature in badlands, we cannot do that kind of analysis because there is not enough information about vegetation on badlands. We know that is a really relevant key question for badlands geomorphology, but in this case, we cannot do that because the information is really limited in badlands studies. We have to do experimental field work in the field, but no literature review. From the literature review was not possible. Was our first idea also linked to land use changes and human impact, but at the end we can only focus and model climatic variables.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, is there any other question, please?
I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Well, thanks, Estela, for the presentation. I think it was really, really interesting. And I was wondering if in these 2 study areas or the 2 sites that you have now in Almeria and in the Pyrenees, if you have like continuous monitoring for the erosion, or you do like for field campaigns.
In my case, in the Pyrenees, that is the area where I directly work, we have experimental catchment in badlands from the last 15 years with a gauging station, and also we do recently, during the last 3-4 years, flight with a drone and also terrestrial laser scanner. Indeed, my PhD 15 years ago or 10 years ago was mainly focused on geomorphological dynamics with field work. And in Almeria also my colleagues have some awareness station, and also they do a lot of experimental work in these areas.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well,